For today's webinar, I'll first just give a brief background about KinetiGait itself and the impetus for developing it. I'll talk about the research that's powered it, and we'll then discuss clinical integration, and we'll talk about clinical interpretation of results as well. Now, primarily, we actually do a number of initiatives here at the University of Calgary, but one of our primary initiatives is with respect to running. The growth and popularity of marathon running, as you can see by this figure, has increased worldwide. This is from 2009 to 2014. If you were to advance that another 5 years, you would see a similar 13% increase worldwide. Some countries such as Russia, China, and the Philippines have seen well over a 200% increase. Here in Canada, we see a year-over-year 10 to 11% increase in the number of people running marathons, and also just involved in recreational running. However, for the last 35 some years, research has shown that upwards of 50% of runners get injured on a yearly basis. Now, this is a burden on our healthcare system, but it also leads to a lot of comorbidities in terms of people stop being active. And we want to keep people active. Really, that's our goal here as a clinic and as a research facility. So, one of the most common ways that people have their injury assessed by a clinician, whether that be a physiotherapist, a chiropractor, is to have some form of gait analysis. This is one of the most ubiquitous methods of trying to understand the underlying pathomechanics of what is causing that injury itself. However, these methods are relatively inaccurate. So dating back to research that was first published in 1995, so over 20 years ago, most 2D approaches, whether it be using a single camera, or in this case, you can also see an iPad being used, at best, you're going to be 30% inaccurate, and sometimes upwards of 300% inaccurate. More importantly, the context is really important to help the clinician and the patient really understand what is going on with their injury. So for example, what does an angle of 143 degrees at the ankle mean? Is that too much? Is that too little? What's the context behind that? Is 72 degrees of trunk lean appropriate? Should it be more? Should it be less? And by how much? So really what we're trying to accomplish here are two different things. We're trying to bring some clinical context to the information itself and help people understand what these numbers mean. And we're trying to reduce the time that's involved in performing this gait analysis. Now, while an iPad or an iPhone seems quite easy, you just pick it up and record, you still have to spend time scrubbing through and finding those frames of data and trying to interpret it and try to come to some conclusion. So even if you're using a single camera, that can be upwards of 45 minutes. If you're using an iPad, that's still time away from your patient that you could be spending. So if you put this in a little bit better context, if we have these three scenarios, so we have a single camera, we actually have our other offering. We developed the 3D gait system, which is similar to the very expensive and highly scientific three-dimensional gait analysis system using multiple cameras that's found here in my lab at the University of Calgary and at many labs around the world. And then we compare that to Kinetisense, or the KinetiGait product. So if you're using a single camera, setup doesn't take very long. You have to put some markers on your individual, whether they're walking or running. Data collection is just a few minutes. And then again, you have to sit down, you have to scrub through, you have to find those frames of data. You're going to click on at least 3 points to generate an angle. And that whole process from start to finish, that's going to take about 45 minutes. Now our 3D gait product, that actually takes quite a bit longer to set up, takes upwards of a half an hour to get all the markers on properly. Again, data collection hardly takes any amount of time. Data processing with our 3D gait system quite literally takes 9.78 seconds. But still, from start to finish, that's 45 minutes. That's a long time to be spending with your patient. So the KinetiGait product, the setup only takes a few seconds. There's no markers. It's a markerless system. Data collection, again, is the same amount of time you're having your patient walk and or run on the treadmill. And then all the data is processed in a matter of minutes. So from start to finish, this is a 5-minute process in order to get a scientific three-dimensional gait analysis. So I just wanted to put this up to provide a little context of how we've been developing this and what we've been keeping in mind, that a clinician and a patient's time is really quite valuable. So KinetiGait, we'll talk a little further about that. It is quicker, it is easier, it is very affordable. The software license is $200 a month or $2,000 for the year. The Microsoft Kinect 2.0 camera is $150 and an adapter is $50. So it's a very affordable system. More importantly, it is scientifically accurate. And as a researcher and as a clinician as well, nothing comes out of my lab unless it is grounded in scientific research. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the science behind this. Now, one of the things that we're very proud of is that we've partnered with Kinetisense. And KinetiGait fits beautifully into their different modules that they have available. And all of these use the same single Microsoft Kinect 2.0 camera. So they have functional movement, posture modules, ways to measure balance and quantify that, as well as accurate measures of joint range of motion. And certainly gait and the analysis of gait fits beautifully into each of these modules. As an example, if you see, and I'll show you some nice examples of it today, we'll do a little demo afterwards, but if somebody is having difficulty in terms of, or demonstrating atypical gait patterns, that could be a restriction with respect to specific joints. Therefore, the Kinetisense product fits beautifully into accurately measuring those specific joint ranges of motion, quantifying that, and helping to guide you in terms of the clinical treatment side of things. If there are certain aspects of gait that are atypical, you could do a deeper dive in terms of what's their balance score? Certainly running and arguably walking is just an act of balancing on one leg, losing your balance and catching your balance on the next leg. And certainly that is very true with running. And balance assessment is a critical component to try to really dive deeper and figure out what is going on with your patient. And then you could do different functional movement screens as well in order to quantify how can this person perform not just gait, but how can they do a one-legged squat? What are other functional movements that you as a clinician can help them to improve for a more global and comprehensive way to understand your patient and treat your patient. So we're really pleased about Kinetisense, and we'll talk a little bit more about how this partnership works as we go through this webinar. So just a brief overview. This is the KinetiGait 3D workspace. There are spatial temporal variables, stride length, stride rate, run speed. We compare the patient to a scientific norm. So here's our patient in green. This is a three-dimensional workspace, and they are compared to a scientific norm. So let's call this person norm. So norm is hundreds and hundreds of runners that we have put together as an exemplar. Think about it as a very expensive scientific, let's just play that again. So you can think of norm as a very scientific yardstick to compare the runner against. And by doing so, and looking at this 3D workspace, we can calculate 3D variance, or how much does this runner vary from the norm, and at what specific point in the gait cycle is that happening. And we're going to talk a lot about 3D variance here in clinical interpretation in just a moment. But this 3D interactive workspace is really quite powerful in terms of allowing you to better understand your patient and try to figure out what is it about their gait pattern that is atypical, and what can you do to help understand that. So at this point in time, it's now stopped at a point of low variance, so it matches up very nicely. And as you toggle through, at that point, they vary a lot. And you can start to really get an understanding for what is typical and atypical about that patient. So in terms of setup, essentially you need a 10-foot by 10-foot space. It's a single camera, as I mentioned. It's going to be about 1.5 meters from the treadmill itself. So about a meter from the back of the treadmill, 1.5 meters from the center of the treadmill. And it's ideal to have bright colored clothing for your patient to wear. And I say that because a number of our clinical partners have full-size runs of shoes. They have full-size runs of brightly colored running shirts and running shorts, just to optimize the data collection itself, because good data in means really good data out. So I always bring that up as a possibility, because you never know what your patient's going to show up with. So it's kind of nice to have the bright colored clothing just to optimize the environment for data collection. Now, we've done a lot of research behind this. So dating back to 2015 is when we published this paper. Jeremy Stewart was a Ph.D. student here in geomatics engineering. And we know that the Microsoft Kinect camera is accurate to 1.5 millimeters. So on the x-axis on the bottom, this is distance between targets. So moving this camera up to 4 meters away or as close as 1 meter away, it's about 1.5 to 2 meters in accuracy in terms of its depth that it can measure. And that's really critical because we are using that depth component in order to measure these various aspects of gait. Now, one of the most common questions we get is why aren't we measuring joint angles? So as opposed to providing this measure of 3D variance. So this is just, I just wanted to show, I'll show 3 pictures here. So this is an individual running on the treadmill, and you can see that the skeleton created through the Microsoft native software lines up really nicely in terms of ankle, knee, hip. It goes into a full body skeleton. But running is a very dynamic, it's very fast. So even if this individual is actually running at a relatively low pace, and 2 frames later, as their feet begin to come together, you can see how the ankles have now merged. The entire pelvis has shifted down and to the left. So the skeleton isn't quite fitting for that period of time. And then 2 frames later, as those feet diverge from one another, it's still trying to figure out where to place that skeleton. And you can see that both feet are now pointed to the right. And that pelvis is shifted even further down and to the left as well. So while some aspects of gait provide very accurate measures of these joint angles, the entire gait cycle is not optimized at this point in time. Now, having said that, if we go back to the modules of Kinetisense and the balance, posture, functional movement screens, those skeletons and those joint angles are very valid, and that has been published already, because those are more static postures. These are slow movements that are occurring. So walking, I have a little more confidence in, but the native Microsoft skeleton does not fit within a running paradigm. And again, nothing's going to come out of my lab unless it's grounded in science. So we are currently doing quite a bit of research to develop a whole new skeleton and optimize these measures of joint angles. And one of the reasons we're able to do that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end, is we have this enormous research database from 3D Gait and also from developing KinetiGait over the last 3 years. So by utilizing that very powerful database, we have well over 5,000 individuals. We're actually able to optimize this skeleton and improve these joint angles, and we'll have that available in future offerings of KinetiGait. But for now, what I can tell you is that 3D variance is highly accurate to 1.5 millimeters, and it is a scientifically valid way of understanding the patient. Now, one of the things that we're also looking at is center of mass. So if you think about, so this is our patient, and this is just one frame of data within our 3-dimensional point cloud. And if I average all of those points together in terms of where they are in space, I can measure the center of mass. So in other words, this is kind of an accumulation or a representation of how this person moves in space as a global unit. And this is a component of 3D variance. And the reason we're doing this is because we're now beginning to research and link wearable technologies to the KinetiGait product. And this is more of a future offering as well, but it's helping to bring together the real world data collections that are occurring. I've given you 2 examples here. This is a Lumo Run device. It attaches to your waistband, and that's been validated by a university in the UK. And the Garmin Forerunner 620 is what I've shown you here as well. And we validated that, as a matter of fact, and published those data in the Journal of Applied Biomechanics last year. So these are 2 valid devices that also measure the center of mass motion for a runner as they're running out in the real world. And we want to be able to bring that real world data into the clinic to help the clinician better understand their patient, both in terms of what are their mechanics that they're exhibiting out in the real world while they're running, and how does that match up to the mechanics that they're exhibiting today on the treadmill in your clinic. So this is a really exciting and the world's first union, if you will, of how wearable technologies and 3D gait analysis are coming together. And I'm also very proud that I'm one of 3 collaborators invited to join the Mobilize Center. which is an NIH Center of Excellence at Stanford University, headed up by Scott Delp. And we're working with them by partnering with their data scientists and pattern recognition experts, as well as our group of clinicians and researchers, in order to continue to really drive this research forward. And certainly my own clinic, the Running Injury Clinic here at the University of Calgary, we are publishing approximately a paper every 6 weeks in order to really try to advance this research so that you have the most evidence-based tools at your disposal. And really, that's what we've been doing over the last 3 years in terms of developing KinetiGait. So let's talk about clinical integration now. So within this scenario, there is a runner, a patient, and it could be a walker as well. It's called KinetiGait, and it's not just a running tool, it's also for walking. I could talk a little bit about our knee osteoarthritis and our healthy aging research, but for today's webinar, I'm just going to focus on running. But within this scenario, we've got a clinician using an iPad, we've got a runner. At the end of the day, this clinician is our client. We have developed this for you in order to try to provide evidence-based tools to help make your job easier to better understand your patient. So the goal of KinetiGait is to either help you develop a new gait analysis service. So for example, hanging a sign in the window that says 3D gait analysis now available at this clinic, and this is a differentiator. Perhaps there's another sport physio clinic just down the road that you're competing with. Well, now you can have 3D gait analysis as a bit of a differentiator and help attract new patients. But we've also developed this in terms of, this is a 5-minute procedure from start to finish in terms of in your hand. So this could also be a weekly appointment. And within our clinical network, it's been very interesting that this is what has organically grown out of the use of KinetiGait, is that some people have decided to advertise as a new gait analysis service, whereas others have simply made this part of their clinical practice, and they're trying to generate a new weekly appointment out of their patient in terms of this overall gait analysis. Now, the return on these investment, as I mentioned, this is a software, piece of software that's relatively inexpensive. It's only $2,000 for the year. If it's part of the Kinetisense package, then there's a deep discount on that. We can talk more about that afterwards. But really, if you're bringing in 2 new patients or using this on just 2 patients per week, within 5 to 10 weeks, you've got a return on your investment. So that's a very attractive offering in terms of how can this help your clinical practice. And really, the value added on this is you as a clinician are gaining a bit of an education on 3-dimensional gait analysis. More importantly, your patient is being educated about their own mechanics and how that is contributing to their overall injury, whatever that injury might be. It's a marketing tool, without a doubt, in terms of letting people understand that you're using this advanced scientific tool, and it's a revenue source, obviously. So if we go a little deeper into these 2 different services, so if you want to set this up as a gait analysis service, clearly this is a pull marketing approach. You're trying to bring new runners into or new patients into your clinic in order to analyze them and help them understand what's going on. So again, the goal, 1 to 2 new patients per week. I started the Running Injury Clinic back in 2004, and we quickly grew to, within a few months, to have a 3 to 5 week wait list. And we were seeing 10 to 16 patients per week just for gait assessment itself. Now, obviously, that doesn't include any rehabilitation. We were just focused on the assessment side of things. But still, it's a very conservative and very realistic goal to bring in 1 to 2 new patients per week. Depending on where you are in the world and what the market will handle in terms of where you are, these gait analysis services range anywhere from $100 to $250. So for example, here in Calgary, we're a city of 1 million people, relatively affluent, and the gait analysis service is $200. In Toronto has 4 times, actually 5 times the population. They're right in downtown Toronto, the MedCan Clinic, and they're charging upwards of $250. Whereas more rural settings, they're charging only $100. And the goal, again, is to help guide your clinical exam and your rehabilitation. You're taking your patient, seen here in green in this picture, and you're comparing them to this norm. So let's talk just a little bit more about who norm is. Now, Norm is not just a single individual. We know from our research that, for example, males and females, they run differently. They are anatomically distinct from one another, and they have very distinct running gait biomechanics. I'm really proud that we were actually the first to publish a normative data set of male versus female recreational runners. That was back in 2003. So we've known this for quite a long time. We published the world's largest study on male versus female, older versus younger, and that was an N of 500. We published that just a few years ago as well. More recently, we've been investigating what are the differences between competitive and recreational runners, or more elite versus novice runners. And we, again, know that there are differences in terms of their overall running mechanics. So you can't just have one norm. And I say this with respect to even a clinician who has been doing gait analysis for, let's say, 20 years. You do have a norm in your head. It's based on your experience. You have some idea of how a runner should move, but you still need to subtype. So being able to dive deep into these individual subgroups is really critical in terms of helping you to make good decisions. So for example, if you have a female competitive runner who comes in and they have knee pain, they will be compared to all female competitive runners within the database. And that's hundreds and hundreds of female competitive runners. And now your patient becomes part of this worldwide network in this database, and that continues to help feed our research and improve these models. Our next partition will be based on age. We just need to collect some more data in order to do a little bit more research in order to really be confident that we've got the right subgroups in all of this. So this in and of itself is a huge advancement in clinical practice, and the ability to compare your patient to a subgroup, a homogeneous subgroup, is a big advantage in terms of understanding what is typical and what is atypical. Now, what I liked about KinetiGait is this is a 5-minute analysis. Your patient comes in, they step up on the treadmill, you record their walking and running information, the data is processed, all of that takes about 5 minutes. So using this as part of your clinical practice is a very powerful tool. You could collect data, a gait analysis on your patients every week, and you could show them what will, you can show them what is typical or atypical about their overall mechanics. And you can compare them to themselves. And that's a critical aspect of this, is being able to compare a patient in terms of how were they walking or running last week and what's going on this week. You could do baseline versus post-rehabilitation, and you're trying to generate one extra appointment out of that patient. And by doing so, you can not only choose a homogeneous subgroup, but you can choose a specific subject. And also, there's a coaching tool. We have such a large database. We have sub-3-hour marathoners. We have specific 4-foot strikers, as another example. So there's a lot of different coaching tools as well as clinical tools available within KinetiGait. So again, this is the workspace. We're going to talk about 3D variants here just a little bit more. Certainly give metrics on stride length, stride rate, run speed. But 3D variants is really where it helps shine a light in terms of what is going on with your patient. So the clinical interpretation, what we do is we collect 30 seconds worth of data, and then we normalize that and average it out. And we line everything up to norm in terms of right touchdown. So the right foot touching down is at the very beginning here of the 3D variance curve. And certainly there's right toe off. There's the swing phase, left touchdown and left toe off, and followed by another swing phase. So with just a very basic understanding of overall gait mechanics, you can begin to understand what's happening with my patient. In this case, left toe off is where we see the most variance. And there's also some variance at right toe off as well. So at toe off, gluteus maximus, gastrocnemius, and soleus are generating the primary amount of force, generating force in order to propel that individual forward. Certainly there's a contralateral arm swing going on at that point. So really trying to do a deep dive and understand this is what's happening at left toe off, as this example shows, can really help you to better understand your patient. If it's during swing phase, for example, is where the most variance is occurring, then that limb is not being prepared to accept body weight at touchdown. And again, that's mostly going to be the quadricep muscles as they activate at the beginning of swing phase. The hamstring muscles are eccentrically contracting to slow the shank down in order to prepare that foot for weight acceptance. A further direction that we're going with, and we should have this available quite soon, is if we calculate center of mass, then we very easily can look at different quadrants of the body. And this gives you a deeper interpretation of 3D variance. So what key aspects are contributing to that atypical gait pattern? So for example, if it is happening at left toe off is where most variance occurs, well, perhaps that is actually the right lower quadrant that's contributing most to that increase in variance. So this allows you, again, to do a bit of a deeper dive to better understand that patient. And we'll have this available very soon. I've got a whole team. We've been working on this for a few months, and we're just going to finish it up over the summer. And another really powerful method is looking between the 3D and the 2D analysis. If you're a clinician and you are used to using a single camera and you've got a really well-developed eye, we completely respect that. We're not trying to replace what you're doing, but we're trying to draw a line between affirmation and information. And we'll show you a nice example of this when we go to the demo. But if you see that again, back to left toe off is where there's an increase in variance, well, that allows you to go back to your 2D analysis and really start to understand, well, what is happening at that point in time? What is contributing to that? We're not trying to distract or take away from your clinical experience or your use of a single 2D camera, but it can really help you to affirm what you think you're seeing from a two-dimensional or single camera standpoint, but we're trying to feed you new information as well to help you key in and really try to better understand what is typical and what is atypical. And then on top of all this, we wrote an entire textbook. So we're very proud. This is published by Human Kinetics. Sherry McDonald is arguably one of the top sport physiotherapists in Canada. She's a former master's student of mine, trained in my clinic on 3D gait analysis, and she's the clinic director of what we consider to be the flagship of using 3D gait analysis technology within a clinical setting here in Calgary. So Sherry and I actually took about 2.5 years to write this textbook. It's available online, so that is one educational resource that's really quite powerful to help bring all this information together. There's about 250 research articles that are all put together in terms of this textbook. And all of our research and other webinars and other videos are also available at runninginjuryclinic.com, which is where we try to provide most of our educational resources so they're available for you. Now, one of the really unique things about what we've been working on is a worldwide network. So getting a KinetiGait system is not just about getting a system and being able to improve your clinical practice. Certainly, that's one of our main goals. But you're also becoming part of this worldwide network. Currently, we have over 60 clinic partners. We have 15 different research partners spanning Deakin University and Auckland University of Technology on the other side of the world, the University of Oregon, Duke University, Jacksonville University down in Florida, the University of ABC and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, just to give a few examples. Now, these researchers work together with the clinicians so that we can help answer your questions and develop new tools for clinical use. So what we're really proud of is, yes, we've developed this highly scientific gait analysis tool for you, but we've been able to do that because of this worldwide collaboration. So becoming part of this worldwide network really helps to drive everything forward in terms of the research and the clinical integration. So, in summary, we feel we've developed a very powerful 3D scientifically accurate. This is all because we want to provide evidence-based tools to help improve clinical practice. How can you understand your patient better? How can we help get the right people, the right care at the right time? And most importantly, this is based on scientific research. We spent 3 years developing this. We continue to drive the research forward in terms of our worldwide network, our partnerships with Stanford University, and certainly within our own group here. And it's because of this worldwide collaboration that we're able to continue to drive and push this forward. So I'd really like to thank you for your time. I'll leave this up just for a little bit here, and I'm happy to take some questions. If you have any questions about the research side of things, please feel free to email me. If you want to learn more about the KinetiGait product itself, how it fits into your clinical practice, Kent Bates is our Director of Business Development, and his email is on there as well. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions. Chelsea, I don't know if any have popped up over the last 30 minutes or so that I've been speaking, but I'm really happy to take some questions, and then we can move, and I'll just show you a short demo.
Of course, so I'll just mention that if you do have any questions at this point, you do just need to unmute yourself, and you should be able to do that in the bottom left corner of your dashboard screen. Wait a minute. Let's see if
well, you know what? Instead of having just kind of this pause here, I'll let people generate ideas, and then feel free to interrupt at any point from now on. But I just want to go into a quick demo here, just so people can get an idea of the clinical interpretation and the clinical integration as well. So if I go into the KinetiGait product itself, this is one of our patients. I'm just going to play back their 2D video. So the beautiful thing about the Microsoft Kinect 2.0 camera is it has an RGB, or a high definition camera, within it, as well as the heat map, and you can see both of those recordings here. So what we automatically do is record. You can pause this. You can step forward in terms of this video. As you play it, you can slow this down by a factor of 75%. So it's the same tool that you've perhaps been using in terms of a single camera and generating an HD video. But automatically, this ability to pause, to slow it down, to step forward, and what we're going to see is that this individual, we'll come back to this 2D video in a moment. But you can scrub through this just to kind of get a better idea of what are you seeing visually. Now I can also output their 3D variants, or their 3D workspace here. So as I let this play through, I can rotate this in all 3 dimensions. I can look at it from different angles. So this is a more superior view. I'll come back to here. I'm going to come from the posterior to begin with. There we go. So I'm just going to step through here. So looking at this screen, you can see that right at left toe off. Again, I didn't mean to have left toe off in the presentation, or I did mean to have left toe off in the presentation and have a nice example of it, just to try to keep that consistency. So as I step forward here to that point in time, there's a few things that me as a clinician that immediately pop out. If I look at these spatial temporal variables, well, this individual is demonstrating a very high stride length. If I rotate back to the side and I put our norm runner, so this is a male recreational runner, so I put the norm runner back on here, you can see that this individual has a very high stride length. So this 2.3 meters, and in fact, the typical stride length for a male recreational runner is 1.9 meters. So they're overstriding by 40 centimeters. However, their stride rate is bang on. So 88 beats per minute, or 176 strides per minute, if you kind of put that in more conventional terms. So 176 is exactly the average for a male recreational runner as well. So they're overstriding. So that's one thing that's relatively easy to fix. As a clinician, you could easily set up a metronome, for example, just do some simple gait retraining with this individual, and that would be a whole extra appointment. That's one aspect of it. And then of course you'd want to do this at the same run speed. This speed happens to be their goal for an upcoming race. So we're testing them at a speed that they're comfortable at and that they're training at. But if I key in on this, this left toe off and what's happening, if I go straight from the posterior aspect, I'm just going to step back just a little bit. And what I want you to notice is as we approach, you'll be able to see right here within their left pelvis, you can already see the green coming through, and it's overtaking the silver of norm, and right here at peak variance. So this is a rotation that's occurring within the left trunk and the left pelvis. So in other words, that whole left pelvis, that right pelvis is stuck. And that left pelvis is really compensating by over-rotating in the transverse plane. And I'm almost laughing at myself. I hope you can see some of these hand actions. I'm a very visual hand talker in a lot of ways, but you can get an idea for that. And I can go back to the 2D video, and now I can get an idea for what's happening at that pelvis. I can step through right at left toe off. And the other thing that stands out for me is I can see this right arm is quite a bit more abducted, and it extends quite a bit more as compared to the left. And again, I can go back to, I can just play this through, and you can see if I just stop it right there again at highest variance, you can see how abducted that right arm is. And if I step through to right toe off, right about there, that right or that left arm is not nearly as abducted, it's not nearly as extended in comparison. So there's some compensatory gait patterns, and that kind of makes sense to me. That right pelvis is stuck, that left pelvis is compensating. There's a lot more rotation going on. Because of that, I need to have a more abducted right arm, and it needs to extend further. If it doesn't, quite frankly, this person will begin to drift off of the treadmill and they won't be able to run a straight line. So this is a compensatory pattern to keep them running straight. Yeah, there's a question.
Reid, this is Steven Saddam. I wanted to ask you, do you have a cheat sheet for the clinics that are getting this? Because you've seen a lot of people, you've looked at this data a lot. Do you have kind of a cheat sheet for where the variance occurs and what kind of to look for all those clinicians who've done some gait analysis, but not a lot of it, where they, intuitively notice that arm abduction, the hip drop, the things like that?
Yeah, that's it. Hey, Stephen, I'm really pleased that you were able to chime. I owe you an email, but that's a fantastic question. So we have a really big cheat sheet called the textbook, and certainly that provides a pretty deep dive in all of this. And we also have what's called the roadmap. So yes, we do have that cheat sheet available, and in other words, here's what's happening. These are all your major actions, major muscles that are involved at touchdown, at toe off, during the swing phase. Here's the research behind that. So all of that information comes with KinetiGait, as well as what we hope is that clinicians kind of put this roadmap up on the wall, so that as they're looking through this, they can kind of gain some understanding. But it's also, again, becoming part of the network. So getting the software in place means that you have access to me, access to this entire network of individuals as well. That's a great question.
Thanks.
I want to show you one other person here, because I understand I want to be conscious of everyone's time. So if I go back, and I'm just going to load up another individual. Here's Alan. And yeah, we'll just pull that up. So we're going to load all this. It loads in all the depth frames, all the color frames. So these are data that's already been collected, but it just takes just a couple seconds to load this up. And as it does that, Alan is one of Canada's top runners, arguably. He's about a 30-minute 10K athlete. If I play back. So he's running at a relatively slow pace for him, but we wanted to have something that was a little bit more realistic. Again, I can slow this down. He's got relatively good form. He's got a funny little arm swing, but that's also partly due to the fact that he's been running on a track almost all his life. But what I want to point out here is if I go to his data, so here's an elite runner, and the first thing that you can notice is that his variance is very low. And I really want to discuss this with respect to, this is a male elite athlete who runs very similar to all other male elite athletes. And I appreciate that about the norm that we've created here, because this gives a little more scientific credence to it. There's no big peaks, there's no big valleys within his 3D variance. And if I just let this play and rotate through, you can see that he matches up very nicely overall. There's a few things you can see that he's got a little bit of increased hip flexion on this right side. There's always a few little mechanics that you can work on. So if you just step through, for example, so here's right toe off. His stride length is bang on. It's 1.86, and again, I said the average was 1.9. His stride rate is bang on as well. He's running a little slower, but we just want to be a comfortable pace. You can see there's a few lags. Again, he's got that little hitch in his arm right here in that left arm. He's a little more flexed at the right hip and the right knee as well. There's always little tweaks that can occur for a runner, but this is just a beautiful example. Here's a healthy runner who's an elite runner, and he compares very nicely to his homogeneous subgroup. If I were to pull up his data and compare it to male recreational runners, there would be a wide amount of variance at specific aspects of the gait cycle, because clearly this competitive athlete would run very different as compared to a recreational athlete. So I just wanted to show that one example of how a homogeneous subgroup is a really powerful way to better understand your patient. So that's where I'm at today. We're 45 minutes in. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Hey, I've got a question, Doc.
Yeah.
So within the subtypes that you have with the competitive versus non-competitive runners, what are the basics, or what are the norms? What are the distances that those runners, competitive runners, do? Are they mostly marathon runners, or they're sprinters?
Well, that's an excellent question. So we really don't have any sprinters. I always say 50% of being smart is knowing what you're dumb at. And my entire Ph.D. and my entire research career has been focused on middle distance to long distance runners.
Okay.
I also know that you can't tell someone that they are a recreational if they think they're a competitive runner.
Right.
So our research has clearly defined that in terms of what their personal best is as compared to worldwide standards.
Sure.
In all of this. But to directly answer your question, most of these individuals are 10K to half marathoners.
Okay, thank you, Doc.
That's the vast majority. But again, this is the power of the database. As we gain more information in time, I said the next partition is going to be based on age. I believe the next partition will then be based on event. So male, competitive, 40-year-old marathoners. And now you'll be able to really boil it down and help your patient who's also trying to stay injury-free and run a marathon, for example.
Right on. Okay.
Then to go one step further, the next part, I was recently interviewed by Runner's World magazine, and they just kept pushing me and saying, okay, well, what's the next partition after that? And I actually think it'll be based on geography. I think there's enough anthropometric differences between different geographies, different ethnicities of the world, that we really begin to get down to different ethnicity groups, different geographic locations, and how that might influence running mechanics. It'll be subtle, very subtle differences, but still, I think, critically important from a scientific and a clinical perspective.
Thank you, Doc.
My pleasure.
Good evening, Dr. Ferber.
Yes.
This is E from Tokyo.
E, how are you, my friend?
Very good. Congratulations for developing great products. I'm very excited.
Yeah, thank you.
I have several questions. And you mentioned that these norms automatically selected by KinetiGait based on the subject setup, or how would KinetiGait select which elite or recreational runners norm? How would KinetiGait select which norm to use?
You would select that while you're setting up your patient.
Okay.
Yeah, so if I could just, where do I want to be? So just as an example here, if I just go back into, go back to the main menu here in subject setup, so you would put in a user ID, you could load somebody up. So if I think I can go, whoops, it's telling me I need to load this information.
Okay.
I'll just do this very quickly so everyone can see. So here is male, female, left, right in terms of dominance. So as you step through these screens, it's going to prompt you to choose whether they're recreational, competitive, etc. The software doesn't automatically do it. It's up to you, and it's a discussion to have with your patient.
Okay, and another question is that when we use a KinetiGait, which I'm trying last couple of days, is there a particular color of clothing you recommend? Within a bright color.
Yes, that's an excellent question. So We do have several YouTube videos loaded up, and I believe you've looked at some of those, but any bright colored clothing, it could be white, it could be yellow, it just helps to collect a little bit better data. But if you have somebody come in and they're wearing black, as I showed you Russell's 2D video, he was wearing black, we're still getting very accurate data from him. But if we wanted to be just a little bit better, any light colored clothing, so light blue, pink, yellow, white, all of that is going to be just great.
And let me ask last question. Is the normal data collected from a healthy subject or some injured subject?
So that's a great question. What we know, so in this case, our normative data is all healthy runners.
Okay.
That's a big advantage. We actually spent 2 summers ago, we employed 2 students to do nothing but collect data from healthy runners.
Wow.
So I know that was a big endeavor. We have hundreds and hundreds of people within the database itself. However, if I take a step back, what I know is that, let's talk about foot pronation just for a moment. Within the scientific literature, you can find probably a handful of articles that will say that excessive foot pronation or rear foot eversion is a causative factor of running injuries. But you can also find a handful of articles, just as many, that say reduced foot pronation is a contributing factor to running injuries. So those are the 2 ends of the spectrum, a foot that pronates too much and a foot that doesn't pronate at all. And everything in the middle is a typically pronating foot. So by building this database and having the data normally distributed is really the goal of being able to make scientific decisions. Where is your patient on that spectrum? So as the database grows, as we start adding in injured runners, that is not a disadvantage. That's a huge advantage, because one individual runner might have very typical foot mechanics, very atypical hip biomechanics, just as an example. So their typical foot mechanics, you're able to see that that is something that you can cross off your list. Now you need to focus on the hip, or you need to focus on the left upper quadrant as an example. So the normative database doesn't have to be just healthy runners. In this case, it is in the beginning, but similar to our 3D gait system, we have over 5,000 individuals, and we're able to look at it in a very powerful way.
All right. Thank you very much. Great answer.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Very good. I like it. Thank you. Okay, Chelsea, I think we're good there. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time and attention today. And Chelsea will be sending out a link, and we'll be posting it on our social media as well. So if you want to go back and review any of this,